uppercut. And like I mentioned before, the uppercut is undertrained and underutilized. The reason it's underutilized is because people train it either poorly or they don't know how to execute it very well, usually because their coaches don't train it very well. So everybody go ahead and get on your center line. Just like this, right? You want to have about the same amount of distance between each foot and the ruler that represents your center line. It's good to have your feet underneath you. Of course, as we end up fighting, our feet have a tendency to creep out. That's just the nature of the game. But you generally want to be about right here, and you want to be able to slide a piece of paper underneath your heel, right? And I know a lot of people get confused by that. I mean, hell, you can fight like this if you want. But really, you don't want to be heel heavy. If you're heel heavy, you're really easy to tip over backwards. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to work on both uppercuts. We're going to start with the lead because it's usually weaker, and it's usually weaker because people have a tendency to lean over and try to torque the punch using the muscles of their torso rather than using the appropriate muscles, which are found in the leg and the shoulder. So everybody go ahead, get your hands up, turn your lead shoulder forward. All right, so this is like your boxing stance, right? You're just normally in this position. When you want to throw a lead uppercut, you're going to do a couple things. First thing is you're going to turn and squat. Now, look at my spine. My spine is still straight. I'm not leaning over. This is one of the first things that people get wrong. You can really pull a muscle back here because you'll see people do this. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Where's my weight?
Way off now.
Way off my center line. Now, it's true when you throw the uppercut, you want your head to come off the center line, right? I'm loading my weight here. I'm pulling my head over this leg. At no point do I want this chin to go past this knee, though. The knee right here, like if you're standing in your stance, there's a box. There's like the intersection here, and there's an intersection back here from where your knees are. You never want your head to go past that box. This is the tipping point. If I'm here, I still have balance. If I'm here, I'm off balance. Make sense? All right, so what do I do to get into that position? I turn my back foot, pivot, good. Bring my chin offline just like I'm slipping. Good opportunity to do this when your opponent throws a right hand and you slip out. Now, while that right hand is out, if you're trying to come on the inside of that hand, what you do from this position is you'll pivot, bring the punch up under the arm into his chin. Not always likely to land, that's fine. Uppercut doesn't have to just go to the chin. I'm here, I can also throw the punch while his arm is extended, throw the punch right here, underneath the pec, here, right into the solar plexus, bunch of different shots. People think of the uppercut as going to the chin. You throw the uppercut at the body and you slide it up as far as it'll go. Why? Because if you're punching your opponent here and your opponent does this, you just drive the uppercut, whichever hand it is, straight up into the chin. If you try to aim for the chin, they're going to go like this and your fist is going to go whizzing by them. And they're probably going to punch you. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Does everybody understand that? All right. So what we do from this loaded position, right? Pivot the back foot, get ourselves in this nice position here. We've squatted now and turned. Now we're going to turn the other way with the foot and we're just going to stand up. And your fist is going to come up basically in a straight line, straight up, right where the center line was. Like this, just like this. Now, this is the ideal uppercut. Very rarely do the punches come across in ideal fashion in actual application against another person. That's fine. If you practice it to be consistent, precise, and rapid, then whatever variations you have to make to the punch in practical application are going to come out as precise, consistent, and rapid as possible given the changing circumstances of the actual delivery of the punch. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're here, we turn, and we lift. There's a very small movement here. And what do you see people do when they throw uppercuts? This, exactly. You see them pull it back and go like this. Now, there are circumstances where you can pull off a big shot, especially when you're on the move, right? We don't want to practice that though. You could practice that in specific circumstances, but in general, we always want to practice punches in the ideal circumstances, which is why we also want to practice them like that while we're shadow boxing, because then you can practice controlling the punch in the event of missing, which you miss more than you hit in boxing. So it's important to practice that. So we're here, we turn the foot, and we stand up, and then we immediately come right back into our normal boxing stance. So just like that. And you can make it small, you can make it big. The other thing is people have a tendency, when they figure out, oh, the body mechanic, they'll keep it real close. But you can throw this punch, you can generally still protect your face by getting the arm out and throwing the punch from farther away, like that. Now, if you'll notice, all the load is being borne by your legs. You're not using your bicep. This is a much larger muscle than this. And when you practice it and you get good at it, you'll actually end up using both legs. You'll keep the majority of your weight here, but you can use both legs to augment the power of the punch. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna come around, look at each one of you doing it, and then we'll go on to the next part. So for the most part, everybody's uppercut looks pretty good. So just some of the things that I notice, sometimes as we're coming up, we get a little loose in the ankle and our feet roll, or we'll lift instead of pivot. You wanna make sure you work on the pivot as much as you can. The other thing is the arm, and you'll see this kind of across the population too. Sometimes people will throw this without turning their fist over. So like when you throw a straight punch, it's good to turn the fist over because it protects your joints and it also gives a rifling effect to the punch. It's the same thing in the uppercut here, except you're flicking the wrist out that way. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So same kind of thing. All right, now get back in your fight stance. Make sure you have a good position over your center line. Now we're gonna do the rear uppercut. Talking is hard. All right, so we're gonna squat and we're gonna turn this one back. Now notice how there's not a whole lot of turning left to be done. It's just like you're slipping a jab. Here I am. If you're standing correctly, really all you're doing is this. Yeah, just pivot that front foot. And then what you're gonna do when you're in this position is you're gonna rotate and stand up. You can do it far away, and you can do it at a shallow angle. The only consideration here is you have to make sure that your elbow follows your fist, just like every punch, right? If your elbow is moving in a different direction than your fist, then you're gonna do this, or you're gonna do some other strange modification of that. You want this to follow this. So if you're coming under for a deep shot, the elbow comes in an arcing motion like this. If it's a shallow shot, then it comes out straight, just like that. People sometimes call that a cash register uppercut. And it's a long range shot that will deliver a lot of power because if you look, it's being driven straight by my rear leg and has a very long path of travel. So that could be an effective long range shot when somebody's expecting you to throw a 2 and you come up with something else. So now, why do we not drop our hand when we get ready to throw our uppercut?
You don't want to telegraph what
You don't want to telegraph what you're throwing, right? And you'll see people do this too, like this, right? Unless you're a very few specific fighters, it's kind of obvious what you're going to do. But if you're already in good position and you drop down, what punch am I about to throw? You don't know, because I could throw a body, I could just jab, I could throw even a lead uppercut from here if I just throw it fast. You don't have to go through the whole process of all this, right? You could be here, drop your weight, and then just spring up. That's totally legitimate too as an application of the punch. It's just that, again, we train the ideal circumstances until you get the gross motor function so that then any modifications you have to make are going to be consistent. So from here, again, I could just drop my weight here and lift with that foot turn, just like that. Real quick uppercut. Typically, you're going to use that more like an up jab, which you could throw from here, or you could throw like this. A couple modifications on an up jab, which is used primarily as a guard breaker. When you throw that rear, again, you can come up underneath, or you can throw it out as a longer range punch. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna come around and look at your rear hand uppercuts now. Yep, same thing. Yep. All right, so when you're throwing your uppercut, which two metacarpals do we want to land with? These two. Right? So whatever you have to do to facilitate that, and it's usually get that thumb out. Boop, boop. See? Now I can land here. Why?
More powerful.
More powerful, but more importantly, these two metacarpals are a lot thicker than these two. Yeah. So that's the other reason why when you're throwing hooks, I'm not an advocate of doing this. Yeah, because if you hit somebody in the dome with these back two metacarpals, your hand is going to crumple like an accordion, especially if you have not tempered your bones in your hands. All right, so now everybody glove up, and we're going to go on to the long vertical cylindrical heavy bags that we have, and I'm going to show you how to modify the uppercuts so that you can throw them effectively on a bag that is not designed for throwing uppercuts.
So is that what?
All right, so we're looking at throwing these uppercuts because, what's her name? Joni will just complain every day. I can't hit the uppercut on the bag. And then we'll do absolutely nothing to try to be able to fix it to do it right. So I'm just like, all right, well, I just listen to her complain, and then I get grumpy, and then the day goes on. The sun still goes, we still revolve around it. Anyway, so here's the thing. In an ideal world, you'd have a hammer bag or a teardrop bag or an aqua bag or a box, or you'd have one of them stupid donuts that goes around this thing that you can hit for uppercuts. You don't always have that, right? So you got to train with what the good Lord gives you, whether it's, a good brain, a good body, a bad body, good equipment, or shitty equipment. So we may not have the right training utensils, but we should never, ever let that be a thing that stops us from training. So when you're throwing the uppercut, what the most generic thing that I suggest is to just throw it a little bit lower than you would throw it if you were intending to hit your target, right? And I just throw it here and I dig it in because you can still practice the mechanics of throwing this uppercut. But if you do it a little bit lower, now you're not sacrificing the technique in order to get a good hit, right? I can still hit the bag good enough. The other thing is, you can also modify the uppercut into a little bit of a hook, right? I'm not having my hand turn out all the way. I'm just throwing what we used to call back in the day a Mexican hook or a Mexican uppercut, right? Like half hook, half uppercut. And I can just throw it, just mix the mechanics. So instead of having a straight and pure linear lift upwards, I'm having a little bit of a sideways movement with my arm and my body. It's good to practice that anyway, because what happens if you try to throw a perfect uppercut every time and their elbow's there? You gotta figure something else out, right? Well, you can loop the uppercut around a little bit, get it back here, sink in deep, then just turn it into a hook. Now all of a sudden, you're changing the application of your tactical approach, which is always a good thing, right? So, go ahead and get on the bag. We're just gonna practice some 5s and 6s and see how that goes. All right, time. So, does that feel better than what we've been doing on the bag? Yeah. Okay, because it definitely looked better. Because I just see people like either pitter patter or just do ridiculous stuff. And the other thing is you can practice missing too. By all means, like if you want to practice the most perfect fundamental form of doing this, by all means, miss the bag and then follow up with a hook, because it's good practice just to miss. Again, that's one of the reasons we shadow box.
You need it a little higher so you get your face in there.
Ah, well, I don't know if they really want to look at me that much.
There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah. So
All right, so now you can see me gesticulate wildly.
That's the whole view right there.
All right, so again, right, we squat, turn, lift. Squat, turn, lift. That looks much better. The one thing though is people have a tendency to do this. And people have a tendency to do that more than when they're throwing hooks. Who knows why?
Rock'em sock'em robots.
Well, I mean, that's sure. So the big thing is when you're throwing your uppercut, you feel like you don't have enough space. When you throw your hook, it's a lot easier to move laterally and step into the punch. So technically with a hook, I mean, you could do this, right? It'd be ridiculous and you'd probably get knocked out, but you could do it. It's really hard to do that with an uppercut. So people feel the compulsion to do this. But the way that you generate space for the uppercut is to squat and to turn. Now, once you get better at doing that, then you can do it on the move, right? And you can do things like turn, bring the uppercut like that while you're pivoting. Easier to do on hooks, but you can do it on uppercuts. And the guys that learn how to do that well are the ones that can get on the inside of the fists and throw them into the chin of their opponent, especially when you get good at ranging. But that's kind of an advanced, that's the next course on uppercuts. So we got functions of the lead uppercut here. Number one, guard breaker. So if he's one of those guys or she or whomever has one of these guards, this is how you break the guard, right? You use that uppercut, pop the gloves apart, send the two in. Stuff the two in immediately following the uppercut. Two, establish dominance by moving the opponent's arm or head. So much like with a hook, you could take a big shot to get them to move their head back. An uppercut that you deliberately miss and then immediately follow with a charge is a good way to get a guy to backpedal. That's a good thing. The other thing is when you throw an uppercut immediately followed by a hook, so if you throw like a 5-7, if they immediately come in to try to defend against that uppercut, now you've given yourself an opening back here. Same thing, if you sink in deep on your opponent to get like a drop shot, a hook that comes around here, and he pops his elbow back, guess what? You've just opened the inside for a same side hook. So, or uppercut rather. So when you're doing these things, you should always put them in the context of what you would be doing, like to follow up or to set up all of these shots. So that's establishing dominance by moving the opponent's arm or moving the opponent's head, both of which are kind of a subsection of determining the, like dictating the terms of the engagement. If you're the one setting the tempo or the pace or the direction of the fight, by what you're doing, you're dictating the terms of the engagement, which is one of the qualities of offense that you should always be seeking to achieve. Grabbing the opponent's elbow and forearm. You can throw an uppercut that's never gonna hit their body and then cup, right? Or you scoop, bring their arm away. Once you bring the hand away from the chin, sink in an uppercut. You can do that both sides, right? If you're stepping out to the right, throw a 5, cup the arm, bang, come in with a hook. Guys in MMA do that more than guys with boxing gloves because the guys with boxing gloves are usually a little bit hampered. It's more of an excuse, but they usually don't even try because the glove's too big and it's hard to sink. But you could just do it by hitting too. You could throw an uppercut and scoop just by turning it into a hook at the last second. Pop the glove away, bang, and then hit him with the other hand. Yeah, that's kind of advanced, but that's the thing. The other thing is you can just move the elbow. Throw a lazy, quick uppercut that just pulls the elbow forward and then hit them with a hard shot underneath, whether it's a hook, whether it's an uppercut, doesn't matter. The whole thing is just you being the one who determines where their hand, where their arm, where their elbow is going to be. Does that make sense? Rhythm disruptor. If you're throwing like left side, right side, left side, right side, left side, right side, if you're just in your fight stance, it's easy to just fake or to feint an uppercut that'll disrupt your rhythm. So you could throw 1, 5, opening up a 3. You could throw 2, come out of your slip, come up with a fake uppercut, and then actually hit them with the 3. You can disrupt your timing with uppercuts. Because uppercuts are easily thrown from positions that you've slipped into or from your neutral stance, they're actually very effective for disrupting other people's timing and rhythm. Last, chin lifting. If you are able to get that fist into the chest and to the chin, when the chin comes up, now you've got their mandible exposed, you blast it with a lead hook or whatever other punch you want to hit it with. Does that make sense? All right, so those are the functions of the lead hook. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna shadow box for a couple minutes, just like, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes. And we're gonna work on throwing lead hooks to set up other things or to use other things to set up throwing a lead hook. I want you to shadow box it first, then we'll actually do it on the heavy bag. Make sense? All right, give it a whirl. All right, so we went over the functions of the lead uppercut. Well, the rear uppercut achieves all of those functions too, but rear uppercut achieves all of the above while also being a harder, but what? Slower shot. So just remember, the rear hand, because there's more accelerating space, means it's going to be harder, but because there's more accelerating space, it's also going to be slower because there's a greater distance that has to be traveled. Now, like we were talking about, if you're going to double up on right hands, what should you do between those 2 right-handed shots?
Move the head off the center line.
Move the head, right? You can get away, and you should be moving your head a little bit, at least slightly off the center line when you're throwing your lead hand shots too. But that is much faster than that. Right? You can just see it. Visually, you can see it. So that being the case, when you throw that shot, move the head, bang, and then move your feet. What's the cheapest form of head movement?
Down.
Footwork, right? Cheapest form of head movement. Let your feet do the work for you. Just step off center line, right? That's the easiest way to do it. It's the most efficient way to do it. It costs the least amount of energy to do this. So nobody ever talks about that though. So just something to think about. So we've covered these things. Now we're going to talk very briefly, so we don't interrupt the next class. We're going to talk about defenses against the uppercut. So 3 primary things. The first, can you read that?
Yep.
Offline head movement. If you want to make it so that your opponent is not just gearing up to hit you, make sure you're not on their center line, right? The battle of boxing ultimately breaks down to your relative position on each other's center line. If you can feint using your head, or rather if you can set up an ambush using your head as bait by tricking your opponent into thinking they can range you and you can pull your head back, that is a great countering opportunity. However, the downside of that is if you screw that up, they are going to drive their fist through your teeth. So if you like your teeth, wait till you've cultivated a little bit more skill and experience before you try that. But anyway, offline head movement, superior way to defend against the uppercut. If your head is always coming off of your opponent's center line, they're going to have a hard time. And when you see one of the reasons that uppercuts are so rarely thrown in typical cases, it's because there's always this battle of relative position happening. And nobody teaches that. I'm sure there's some coaches out there who teach it, but I just don't see it being taught very well. But at the end of the day, you keeping your opponent on your center line while remaining off of theirs is the entirety of the tactical engagement of boxing. That's how you dictate the terms of the engagement, right? Keep them in your crosshairs. All right, anyway, enough about that. Inside, roll towards the center line. Just like this. Typically with the elbow, kind of depends on how high they're throwing the uppercut. Bang, ha. It's great when you're moving. It's less great to just sit there and absorb those shots. It's like rolling into a hook. If you're rolling into the hook and you can roll into it with enough amplitude that you cut their punch off, you choke their punch, then it's an effective thing. If you're just standing there blocking, then you're absorbing all of that impact in your arms. What happens when your arms get tired? Your biceps start to get loose. Those fibers start to unglue from each other. Your hands are going to do this. So it's important that you use the right tool to achieve the right desired effect. So inside roll towards the center line, great, but you're going to want to ass out a dodge as soon as you get that done and move out and counter or do whatever you're going to do. The drop catch. So if I'm here, somebody throws an uppercut, same side, just like that. They throw an uppercut, and again, this is also bolstered by a little bit of body movement, right? That's gonna help you a lot more than just trying to catch it here. Because at some point, they're gonna throw a good uppercut, they're gonna aim it here, they're gonna drive your own fist in your chin, and you're gonna look like a big dum-dum. So don't look like a donkey while you're fighting. So keep your hands here, right? And the same thing, bah, and then typically you're gonna fire over top while moving, bow, or whatever you're gonna do, right? So does that make sense? So offline head movement, inside roll, or a drop catch. And remember, when you're catching, you're not doing this. Just like when you're catching somebody's jab, you're not doing this. You're just letting a match on your chin. That's it. All you're doing is deflecting it enough that it comes off the chin. It can even still kind of touch your chin, but if your hand's right there, it's gonna deflect enough of the power that the jab's gonna have virtually no effect. It might look like a scoring blow if you've got bad judges though. So if you're boxing in a match, that's a consideration for that. So anyway, we have eclipsed the amount of time designated for this class. So thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.